She was never supposed to stay. That's what everyone told her, and what she kept telling herself as well. The city was meant to be temporary, just a pause between mistakes, just a place to breathe before moving on again. But life has a quiet way of undoing plans when you least expect it. He noticed her long before he spoke to her. Not because she was loud or dramatic, she wasn't. It was the way she sat alone, always choosing the same corner, always pretending she wasn't watching anyone. Like someone who had learned that observing was safer than participating. Their first conversation was accidental. A comment about the weather. A half smile. Nothing memorable. And yet, something lingered in the silence that followed an unspoken recognition, as if both of them sensed that this moment mattered more than it should. He carried his own damage, neatly hidden behind routine and restraint. He had built his life carefully, brick by brick, after losing something he never spoke about. Stability became his shield. Emotion, a risk he avoided at all costs. But with her, the rules began to blur. Days passed. Conversations grew longer. The air between them changed, heavier, charged with things neither dared to name. There was no rush, no promises, no dramatic confessions. Just two people standing at the edge of something neither had planned to fall into. And the most dangerous part. For the first time in years, staying no longer felt like a mistake. She started noticing the changes before she admitted them to herself. The way she adjusted her schedule without thinking, how certain hours of the day suddenly felt important. She told herself it was coincidence, routine, nothing more. But coincidences don't usually make your pulse quicken. He, on the other hand, was painfully aware of what was happening. Every conversation with her pulled him slightly out of balance. He found himself listening more carefully, weighing his words, wondering how much of the truth he could safely reveal without exposing the parts of himself he had worked so hard to bury. There was comfort in their conversations, but also tension. A quiet question hovered between them. What is this becoming? One evening, they sat across from each other in near silence. Outside, the city moved as it always did, indifferent, loud, relentless. Inside that small space, however, everything felt fragile, suspended, as if one wrong word could shatter whatever they were slowly building. "I don't usually let people get this close," she said suddenly, eyes fixed on the table. He didn't answer right away. "Neither do I," he replied, and in that moment, honesty felt heavier than any confession of love. They weren't crossing lines, not yet, but they were standing dangerously close to them. Each shared look, each pause in conversation carried meaning neither of them was ready to confront. And beneath it all was a growing realization. This wasn't about attraction or loneliness. It was about recognition. Seeing someone who reflected the parts of you that were still healing, still afraid, still hoping. For both of them, the question was no longer if things would change, but whether they had the courage to let them. The first moment of doubt arrived quietly. It slipped in between laughter and silence, between comfort and awareness. She felt it when she realized how easily she relaxed around him, how naturally her guard lowered in his presence. That realization scared her more than loneliness ever had. He sensed the shift immediately. She spoke a little less, smiled a little tighter, as if retreating into a familiar shell. He didn't ask why. He understood the instinct to pull back. He'd lived there for years. "I should probably leave soon," she said one evening, though neither of them moved. He nodded, pretending the words didn't land like a warning. "You don't have to explain," he said, even though part of him wanted her to. The silence stretched. Heavy, loaded with everything they refused to say. There was something dangerously intimate about that restraint, two people acknowledging desire and fear without ever naming either. Later, alone, he replayed every moment in his head. Wondered if he was imagining things. Wondered if this was simply two broken people mistaking familiarity for something deeper. The thought unsettled him. She lay awake that night, staring at the ceiling, bargaining with herself. Don't get attached. Don't ruin the balance. Don't hope. Because hope had a way of demanding more than she was ready to give. And yet, when morning came, neither of them had walked away. Something had already shifted, not enough to be visible, but enough to be irreversible. The kind of change that doesn't announce itself, but quietly rearranges the shape of your life. They were no longer just passing through each other's days. They were becoming a part of them. It happened on an ordinary day, which somehow made it worse. No dramatic setting, no raised voices, just a moment when the fragile balance between them finally gave way. She arrived late, distracted, carrying a tension he couldn't ignore. Something had followed her into the room, something heavier than silence. "I might be leaving sooner than I thought," she said, as if mentioning the weather. The words landed hard. He kept his expression neutral, but inside something fractured. "Is that what you want?" he asked carefully. She hesitated, too long. "It's what makes sense." That answer cut deeper than a goodbye ever could. Because sense had been the excuse they both used to avoid risk, to justify distance, to survive. For the first time, he didn't hide. "You don't always have to choose what's safest," he said, voice low. "Sometimes what makes sense is what destroys you slowly." She looked at him then, really looked, and something in her composure faltered. "And sometimes staying is what does the damage," she replied. They stood there, suspended between truths that couldn't coexist. He wanted to reach for her, to ask her to stay, to say everything he'd been holding back. She wanted him to tell her she was wrong, that leaving wouldn't cost her everything. Neither of them did. That night, the distance between them felt wider than ever, even though nothing had physically changed. No doors slammed, no final words spoken, just the quiet understanding that whatever this was, it had reached a point where pretending no longer worked. And the most painful realization settled in slowly. They weren't afraid of losing each other. They were afraid of what staying would require. He tried to act normal. He answered messages. He went through his routine. He laughed at the right moments. But every second felt staged, like he was performing a version of himself that no longer existed. She noticed. "You're disappearing," she said one evening, not accusing, observing. "I'm still here," he replied too quickly. She shook her head. "Your body is, not you." That landed closer to the truth than he wanted to admit. Because pulling away had become easier than fighting for something that might still slip through his fingers. "I don't know how to do this halfway anymore," he confessed finally. "Either you stay or I start letting go." The words hung between them, heavy and irreversible. Her breath caught. She hadn't expected an ultimatum, especially not one wrapped in honesty. "That's not fair," she said softly. "I know," he replied, "but it's real." Silence followed, the kind that presses against your chest, demanding a decision. She looked away, as if the answer might be written somewhere else. "I wish loving you didn't feel like choosing against myself," she whispered. That sentence shattered something in him, because he never wanted to be the reason she felt trapped. And yet, here they were, two people hurting not because they didn't care, but because they cared too much in incompatible ways. He nodded slowly. "Then don't choose me," he said, even though it cost him everything to say it. Her eyes filled, but she didn't stop him when he stepped back. For the first time, he understood. Sometimes love doesn't end in anger or betrayal. Sometimes it ends in mercy. The days that followed felt unreal, like time had lost its structure. They still saw each other, still exchanged a few words, but something essential was missing. The ease, the warmth, the unspoken certainty that whatever happened, they were choosing each other. She told herself this distance was temporary, necessary. That space would bring clarity. But clarity never came, only a growing ache she couldn't name without admitting what she was about to lose. He stopped reaching out first, not out of pride, but self-preservation. Every unanswered message, every delayed reply felt like reopening a wound that refused to heal. He told himself he was doing the right thing, giving her freedom, honoring her choice. Yet every night ended the same way, with him staring at the ceiling, replaying the moment she almost stayed. One evening, she showed up unexpectedly. "I can't sleep," she said. "I keep thinking I made a mistake." The honesty in her voice shattered the careful distance he had built. "Then why are you still leaving?" he asked, quieter than he felt. "Because staying means risking everything," she replied, "and I don't know if I'm brave enough." He took a step closer. "Neither did I, but I was willing to try." Tears slid down her face, unchecked. "I don't want to hurt you." "You already are," he said gently, "not by leaving, but by standing halfway." That was the truth she couldn't escape. For the first time, she saw the cost of indecision clearly, not as safety, but as loss. Not as protection, but as slow erasure. She closed her eyes, breathing through the fear, the doubt, the weight of every past disappointment. When she opened them again, her voice was steady. "I don't want a safe life," she said. "I want a real one." He exhaled, a sound somewhere between relief and disbelief. And in that moment, both of them understood. Love isn't about certainty, it's about choosing, even when you're afraid. The morning after their conversation felt heavier than any night before. She walked through the city streets, watching strangers pass, each absorbed in their own worlds. And yet, every glance at a passing couple, every laugh echoing from a cafe reminded her of him. She realized that the space she had tried to create only made her notice him more. He sat alone in the small apartment, staring at the untouched coffee cup from the morning. He wanted to call, to text, to reach out and break the distance, but something in him hesitated. Fear, stubbornness, and the memory of her tears held him back. By the afternoon, the ache of uncertainty became unbearable. She returned to the same bridge where they had first talked that night, hands gripping the cold railing. And there, he was standing silently, as if the city had guided him to the same place. "I couldn't stay away," he admitted, his voice low, almost breaking. "Even though every part of me tried to," her breath caught. "I thought I was the only one," she whispered, her voice trembling with a mix of fear and relief. They stood there, the city humming around them, neither moving closer nor stepping back. The air between them was thick with unspoken truths, fragile hopes, and the weight of choices yet to be made. Finally, he reached for her hand, a cautious, tentative touch that carried more meaning than any words could. She didn't pull away. In that single, suspended moment, both understood. The next step would either bring them together or shatter the fragile trust they had just rebuilt. And neither of them knew which it would be. The following evening, the city seemed to hold its breath. Lights reflected on the wet pavement as she hurried through the streets, her mind replaying every word they had exchanged. She told herself this was just a moment, a pause, but her heart knew better. Every step drew her closer to him, and to the risk she wasn't sure she was ready to take. He waited at the small cafe where they had met weeks ago, the smell of coffee and rain lingering in the air. When she arrived, he barely smiled, but his eyes told her everything. They had crossed invisible lines neither had fully acknowledged yet, and now every glance, every gesture carried weight. "I keep thinking about last night," she admitted, voice quiet. "And I don't know if I'm brave enough to face what comes next." He reached across the table, fingertips brushing hers. "Courage isn't the absence of fear," he said softly. "It's the choice to move forward despite it." She looked at him, studying the lines of his face, the tension in his jaw, the honesty in his eyes. She wanted to retreat to protect herself, but she also wanted to stay, to trust him. They walked together later, through the quiet streets, each step tentative. The shadows of buildings stretched long and uncertain like the path ahead. "What if I fail?" she asked, voice barely audible. "You won't," he replied, though he wasn't certain. "Not if we face it together." A sudden sound made them freeze, footsteps echoing from the alley nearby, too quick, too deliberate. Their hands gripped each other instinctively. Nothing emerged from the shadows, yet the moment reminded them of the fragility of what they were building. Even in the calm of their growing connection, the world waited, unpredictable, relentless, ready to test every choice they made. And as the night deepened, both realized that love wasn't safe, but it was theirs if they dared to keep it. The next morning felt heavy. She woke restless, heart twisting with both longing and fear. Every message from him seemed urgent, every silence unbearable. She wandered through the city streets, watching couples pass, every laugh a reminder of what could be, what might slip away. He sat staring at his phone, thumb hovering, unsure whether reaching out would comfort or destroy the fragile balance between them. Every word felt like a gamble. Every second apart made the ache sharper. By noon, they met at the park. The usual city noise faded into the background, replaced by rustling leaves and distant birds. They walked quietly, the tension between them thick yet familiar. "I can't stop thinking about us," she admitted, her voice trembling. "I want this, but I'm terrified." He took her hand, holding it lightly, feeling the tremor in hers. "Fear doesn't mean it's wrong," he said softly. "It means it matters. And this us, it matters more than anything else." A sudden shout echoed nearby. Both flinched, hearts racing. Nothing dangerous, just a reminder that life waited outside their fragile bubble. Yet in that moment, they understood. Love wasn't safe, but it was theirs if they chose it. Their hands remained entwined, each step forward a silent promise. But deep down, both knew that the next choice could change everything. By late afternoon, the sky had darkened, clouds casting shadows over the streets. They walked side by side, hands brushing occasionally, hearts tight with unspoken fears. Every glance carried the weight of choices neither dared fully face. Her phone buzzed, a message from someone in her past, someone familiar, safe, tempting. Her chest tightened. The old fear whispered that leaving would be easier. He noticed the pause. "Everything okay?" he asked gently. She shook her head. "Just memories," she murmured, slipping the phone away. He reached for her hand. "You don't have to hide from me. We're here together." She gripped his hand tightly. "I don't want to lose this." "We won't," he said, though even he couldn't be certain. Then the rain started, first drops, then a steady pour. They ran for cover under a small awning, laughing despite the tension. Yet beneath the laughter lingered fear. One wrong step, one moment of doubt, and everything could fall apart. They stood close, drenched, the storm around them mirroring the storm in their hearts. And in that suspended moment, both understood. Love wasn't about avoiding fear, it was about facing it together. But as thunder rumbled above, a flicker of uncertainty crossed her eyes, a quiet warning that the next choice could change everything. The following morning was quiet, almost too quiet. She woke to an empty apartment, the sunlight slipping through the blinds, painting the walls with soft gold. Every sound outside felt amplified, distant footsteps, car horns, the hum of the city, and yet, inside, all she felt was the weight of absence. He hadn't called, he hadn't texted. Each second stretched longer than the last, and she realized how fragile the bond they had rebuilt truly was. Doubt clawed at her chest, whispering old fears. What if he changes his mind? What if she wasn't enough? By mid-morning, she decided to meet him, walking quickly through streets slick from last night's rain. Her hands shook, and her chest tightened with anticipation. She imagined every possible scenario. A warm smile, a cold dismissal, a conversation that would unravel everything. He was already at the cafe, sitting with his head down, staring at the untouched coffee. When she entered, he looked up, eyes dark with conflict, lips pressed tight. Their silence stretched, uncomfortable and loaded with meaning. "I don't know how to do this," she admitted, voice low, trembling. "I want to stay, but I'm terrified of what comes next." He studied her for a long moment, then exhaled slowly. "Neither do I," he confessed. "But we're already here, we can't go back now." She reached for his hand. He took it, and for a fleeting moment, it felt like a promise. But even in that touch, the tension was palpable, the unspoken knowledge that fear could undo them with one wrong step. As they left the cafe together, a sudden noise from an alley made them both freeze. A shadow moved too fast, too deliberate. Hearts raced. Their bond, fragile as it was, suddenly felt dangerously exposed to the world. And in that heartbeat of fear, they both realized, the next decision wouldn't just define their day, it could define everything. The evening air was sharp and electric, carrying the distant hum of the city and the promise of a storm. She walked beside him in silence, every step measured, as if the ground itself could betray them. Their hands brushed occasionally, a small spark of reassurance amidst the tension, yet neither spoke what weighed most heavily on their hearts. "I'm scared," she admitted quietly, barely above a whisper. "Scared that we'll lose this, that one mistake could destroy everything." He paused, turning to meet her gaze. The streetlights reflected in his eyes, making them appear both vulnerable and resolute. "Fear doesn't mean failure," he said. "It means what we have matters, and if it matters, we fight for it." A sudden flash of lightning illuminated the empty street. The distant rumble of thunder made them flinch in unison. Their proximity now carried both warmth and tension, the kind that could either heal or ignite. She looked down, wrestling with the internal storm. Memories of past heartbreaks, of times when trust had failed her, surfaced unbidden. "I don't know if I can do this," she confessed. "I don't want to hurt you, and I don't want to hurt myself." He reached for her hand, gripping it with a firmness that conveyed more than words ever could. "We don't have to be perfect. We just have to be honest and present, together." They walked further into the quiet streets, letting the city blur around them. But the world outside wasn't idle. A shadow from the alley earlier lingered in their minds, a reminder that life often intruded without warning. And as they turned a corner, a sudden sound, a sharp, metallic clang, echoed from somewhere nearby. Both froze, hearts pounding. Fear mingled with adrenaline, tightening their grip on each other. In that suspended moment, they understood the truth they had been avoiding. Love wasn't simple, and choosing it meant facing the unknown together, no matter how terrifying it might be. The night had grown heavy, the city wrapped in a fog that blurred streetlights and distant sounds. They walked together, but each step felt like navigating a minefield. Every glance, every word carried unspoken fears, the delicate balance of their bond teetering on the edge. She stopped suddenly, turning to face him. "I don't know if I can keep doing this," she said, voice trembling. "It's too much, the fear, the uncertainty, the possibility of losing you." He reached for her face, gently holding her chin so she would meet his eyes. "Then we do it anyway," he said firmly. "Because what we have is worth it, even if it's scary, especially because it's scary." A sudden noise from the street, a crash of metal, a shout, footsteps running made them both flinch. Instinctively, he pulled her closer, shielding her from the unknown. The city, unpredictable and unrelenting, reminded them how fragile their moment of peace was. "I can't lose this," she whispered, leaning into him. "I won't." "You won't," he assured her, though his own chest tightened with the weight of truth. "We'll face it all together." But the universe has a way of testing resolve. A figure emerged from the fog, familiar yet threatening. Her eyes widened. "It's him," she breathed. He tightened his grip, ready to protect, ready to fight if needed. The street seemed to shrink around them, the fog pressing close, the tension so thick it was almost physical. In that instant, everything hung in the balance. Every choice they had made, every risk they had taken, led to this single, fragile moment. One wrong move, one word, one hesitation, and it could all shatter. And neither of them knew if they were ready for what came next.